Since 1983, FAME has helped business and education work for Maine. Contact the Authority, the Finance Authority of Maine.
This is our Afterthoughts segment where we keep our guests around from our broadcast show for a little extra time to drill down a little bit deeper into some of the subjects we weren't able to get to on the broadcast. Today we have with us Eliot Cutler, independent candidate for governor. Thank you for sticking around.
Great.
As I mentioned, we got about another 10 minutes here. We were talking during the break, and you said, oh yeah, well ask me that one. Okay, I'm going to ask you this. And I was talking about, there's a perception by some folks that you've abandoned kind of your environmental roots. You clearly were a part of that in earlier environmental work, and yet some of the changes in regulations, people are concerned about that.
Yeah.
What do you say?
You know, I've done environmental work all my life, a 40-year career, and it's part of my DNA, starting with Ed Muskie and all the way through my own law practice. I understand the importance of tough regulations, and I understand the importance of the assets and the resources that we're protecting with tough regulations in Maine. But I also know that our economic activity in the state of Maine is at a dead stop. We're dead in the water. And I've come to learn that we don't invest in Maine to expand our businesses, in large part because of two reasons. One is this cost structure, cost of electricity, cost of energy, cost of government services. And the other side is the wall of no. And that wall of no is not always a direct no. It's often just a delayed no or a maybe. We are business unfriendly when it comes to administering our very tough, properly tough regulations.
Okay.
We've got to stop that. We have built a reputation.
So you're not abandoning those regulations?
No,
those
but I'm saying we've got to make this work.
Streamline it, make it more predictable, all those things a business wants.
Make it predictable, make it timely, make it no longer standardless, no longer arbitrary. There's too much unpredictability.
The question that we didn't get to during the show was, every week we hear about three things with businesses. It's if we can have access to capital, access to markets, and access to a skilled workforce, and I got a good idea, I'm probably going to make money. Talk about access to capital. What can you do as governor? How do we encourage that, fix that, and is there a role for government in that?
We have a big problem in Maine, Alan, in terms of capital. It's a big working capital problem. Yes, there are problems in obtaining capital for startups and for entrepreneurial activities. But the biggest problem I think we have right now is a working capital problem, and that's a particularly difficult problem for small and medium-sized businesses, and an even more particular problem for small and medium-sized businesses in a cyclical industry. And we have a lot of that.
Is working capital problem, is that code
credit,
for
credit.
We got a credit crunch?
Yeah,
and the banks,
credit line.
banks still are
the banks are being very, very cautious, very cautious about lending. And the new federal law, however you feel about it, whatever your thoughts about the new federal law, the new federal law is going to make it even worse because it's going to make the banks and other lenders much more chary about credit risk. And I think we're going to have to look in Maine at some ways in which we can help support working capital.
What would you do as a governor? What can you influence?
I'm wide open to suggestions.
I mean, banks are private. They should be private.
They should be private.
How can you influence?
They should be private. Well, there are a lot of different ways. I mean, there can be guarantee programs. There can be there can be credit support programs. There are different ways of doing it.
Okay.
We can work more closely with the SBA. I mean, we have a wonderful head of the Small Business Administration who is from Maine. Karen Mills knows Maine. But we need to really focus on working capital and solving those problems for small and medium-sized businesses in the state.
You also, speaking of capital and incentives for business as well, you want to, how do you, give us your comment on TIFs, tax increment financing. You've got some comments about how that should be maintained and whether it's available or?
Yeah, rather than just talking about TIFs, let me talk about tax credits and
all right.
You know, we have a whole range of expenditures in the state of Maine or in any state that can be lumped under the umbrella of tax expenditures. These are programs, for credits, for tax deductions, for other kinds of tax breaks that are legislated, put on the books, and never, in Maine at least, never evaluated again. They're put on the books. We put something on the books, pine tree zones, and we say, you know, pine tree zones are a good thing for these particular areas of the state of Maine where we need some help to bring in business. We put them on the books. We never evaluate whether they're working. We never go back.
But that has a sunset, doesn't it?
Wait a minute.
Okay.
And then we say, well, let's make Pine Tree Zone, let's make the whole state a Pine Tree Zone.
Right.
Whether it has a sunset or not, that's not the point. We are effectively spending money every year in tax expenditures like those.
So are you saying that Pine Tree
Some
Zone
work,
didn't help?
some don't.
Okay, let's talk
some
about Pine Tree
work,
Zone just
some
particularly.
don't.
Do you see that one as a working one?
But you've got to evaluate them.
Okay.
All right. My complaint is that unlike the spending that goes through the appropriations
Right.
process, we don't even evaluate. They go in cruise control, these tax expenditures. I want to bring everything into play, and I want to zero base the entire budget,
Okay.
and I want to make sure people understand what that means.
But let me just ask.
Yes.
Well, do you support Pine Tree Zone as a policy, as that kind of incentive policy for helping grow businesses in Maine and attract businesses to Maine?
I want to see an evaluation of how well it's working and whether we're getting value for our investments.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
We may well be, but I want to see the data. Any businessman would want
luck
to
finding
see
that, by
the
the way.
data. Well, that's the problem,
Right.
isn't it?
Right. Well, no, it's there. It's there, and I think.
But
you have to be able to get
you
to
can
it.
tease it out.
All right.
We have to see it. But I want to
ahead.
make this point about
Good.
zero-based budgeting.
Yes.
We're in trouble in Maine from a spending perspective because we have a structural problem. We never take anything away from the government. We don't close down agencies. We don't close down programs. We simply take last year's spending level and we say, let's tweak it a little here or let's tweak it a little there. And then when it comes time to balancing the budget, what do we have to do? We have to do furloughs, we have to do 10% across the board cuts, and we borrow $95 million at the end of the year,
Right.
pay it back the next day, which is like paying off your credit card with another credit card.
Right.
All right. We're going to have to zero base everything, take everything down to zero, build it back up, and see what stays.
Well, you brought that back up, so before we get to some of the other things, I want to follow up on that then too. You've given a lot of thought to this about
I've not only given a lot of thought, I've done it before.
and running the state and looking at. I know you have to be governor before you can really see all of the details of it, but how much cutting do you think there would need to be? What's the size reduction? How many jobs could you cut out of state?
I don't think you measure it. Honestly, don't think you measure it in terms of jobs. I think you measure it in terms of programs and activities and deciding what stays, what we can afford, and what has to go. And some level of employment will fall out of that. But if you start making judgments on the basis of how many workers we need to employ by state government in the state of Maine, you're making a big mistake.
Okay. All right, we're not going to have a lot of time, so let's get to energy. Let's talk about energy, because I know that is one of your the cost of energy to businesses. We hear that all the time. How do we make cost of energy more effective in Maine? And my follow-up question is, do you support offshore drilling?
No, I'm absolutely against. I've said that if anyone wants to drill for oil in the Gulf of Maine, they're going to have to drill right through me, and I mean it.
Okay, well, tell us the other candidates then. Okay,
One
energy costs.
One of them's already heard it. Our problem in Maine is that we have the lowest prices for electricity in the Northeast, but we don't compete for economic activity with states in the Northeast.
All right.
Our competition, if you build ships and Bath Iron Works, is Pascagoula, Mississippi, and they pay 25% less for electricity. If you make lumber, finished lumber, or paper from wood fiber, we compete with the Northwest, the Wisconsin, and Southeast. If you process lobsters, or if you process blueberries, or you process potatoes, you're competing with the Canadians, and they pay 2 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour. We have to get our prices down.
How do we do that?
You do that in 2 ways. Number one, you have an energy financing authority. It's 3 people sitting around a table, not a big new bureaucracy. But what they can do is they can borrow in the tax-exempt debt markets, cheapest capital, bring it into the state to generate electricity here. And then you have as your mission doing public-private partnerships with private market generators and taking a piece of the output and selling it at your cost, which is low, directly to users to generate jobs and incomes and opportunities. That's one thing you do. And the second thing you do is you negotiate with the Canadians and with ISO New England at the same time. It's a very tough negotiation in an effort to figure out how to get some of that surplus electricity in Canada into Maine at their price.
We're going to have to stop it there, but we got a lot more, but next time. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you
Pleasure
for
to
being
be
here.
here.
Thanks. Thank you all.